Oh, hello.
Hi. How you doing, Frazer?
Yeah, not too bad. I've been for a bike ride today. That was lovely. I've just been setting up behind me. I'm doing a live stream tomorrow. So today's a day off, or a freelance day, if you will. So it's kind of like an odds and sods day, which is nice.
Yeah, I haven't been for a bike ride today, but I have been pretty much every other day, except for the week it rained constantly. That was just horrible. But yeah, other than that, been trying to keep productive, but it's been, well, it's easier said than done.
Yeah,
I wake up
absolutely.
with the
Yeah,
best will in the world, and
yeah,
then the time goes very quickly now, for some reason.
yeah.
How about you? You're still with Signals, right?
Yeah. Signals is persevering.
Yeah.
It's just me and Jamie at the moment, but yeah. So I'm doing that 3 days a week, remotely, obviously. But I'm working on a project currently in the research stage for a project that's all about communication technology along the Tendring coastline, which is like a really niche thing. But it's fascinating. I've been reading all about the Naze Tower, and there used to be like a radar dish on top during World War II, part of this big network of like East Coast radar systems where they were kind of looking in the radar sense for Luftwaffe, like approaching
Oh
Britain.
yeah.
And yeah, there's like some really interesting stories. When they first set it up, it was rubbish, and they couldn't work out why the signal strength was so weak. And this engineer was walking up the stairs in the spiral staircase of the tower, holding a light bulb, and the light bulb started glowing randomly, and it was like, what is going on? What is this? And he took the light bulb and sort of moved it nearer the banister, and it started glowing even stronger. And what they realized is that the balustrades of the the banisters of the staircase were exactly half the wavelength of the frequency that the radar was
Wow.
emitting. So basically, all of the banisters acted as antennas all the way up the staircase. So all the all the energy that this radar was like pumping out was being absorbed by the tower itself. Uh, I can just imagine this like engineer walking up the stairs with this light bulb, and it starts glowing, and you're like, "What is
That's
this?"
like Lovecraftian horror right
Yeah,
there.
yeah.
It's
But
so
yeah, you wouldn't think you'd need to like change. So they had to ground the staircase banister, and then it was fine. But I just that story really stood out for me in my research. I was like, oh, that's beautiful. There's something really magical about that. So yeah, I'm researching that at the moment and thinking how we're going to do a series of podcasts, but also thinking about what that might look like as a workshop activity and what parts of the community we can engage with. Because we had like not completely different, but we had like a whole project planned, and it's been completely sidelined. So we've got to like reimagine the project. But yeah, that's cool.
yeah. One of the things I wanted to talk to you about was your recent work with BBC Sounds.
Mm.
Do you want to talk a bit more about that?
Yeah. So last year, I, as an artist, successfully applied to the New Creatives scheme. So it's like a talent development program for the BBC, and you go to them with an idea, and they had 3 different categories. They had an audio category, a film category, and then an interactive. And yeah, I successfully got on in the audio category, and my project was about kind of capturing the energy of Walton Pier in sound. So I recorded the people, I recorded the machines, used some like electromagnetic microphones to kind of capture the sounds of the lights and the circuits. I interviewed loads of people. I just spent a lot of time on the pier, basically. And it was really a really good project. Really enjoyed it. Stressful, but I'm really like genuinely quite happy with the work that I've made as a result. Which anyone who is an artist will know that rarely happens. You're always your worst. Well, at least I am always my own biggest critic. But I'm really proud of that, and I finished making it and then didn't listen to it for like 6 weeks. And then first time I listened to it again was actually when it went out on the radio, and I was really nervous. Because I can just remember coming away from the last mixing session being like, oh, I should have done that, should have done that. But I listened to it, I was like, oh no, that was all right. Yeah. Which is quite nice.
One of the things I really liked about it as well is how, so you went there with the intention of like capturing all the sounds, but I love all the kind of stories behind the sounds as well, and what you start imagining. It's almost like there's so much more not there than there is, and you just start to. I was just sitting there listening to some of the sounds, and you can just sort of picture little scenes in your head of people doing stuff on the pier, and that's what I find really interesting about it.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's what the piece does really well. Is it captures these little moments from individual people, because that's what's really magical about a place like that. Is it sort of means a different thing to different people. So some people are there. Just on my first research trip, I went there and it was the middle of the day, and there was this like dad and his son at the arcades, and I was like, shouldn't he be at school? And he just like won the jackpot, and I sort of went over and I was recording, and I said, told him what I'm doing, yada yada, and he was like, oh yeah, no, it's his 13th birthday today, so we just I just rung up the school, said he's sick. And so they like bunked off school to go to the arcade. I thought, oh, that's great. I definitely can't share this.
Yeah.
But that was wonderful. And then I met the bloke who like installed the bowling alley at the end, and some of the kind of women that he used to manage are still really good friends with him. And so I got them all around a table, and they had like a bit sort of kind of they were just reminiscing, and I was recording that, and that's when you got the stories of like the pennies falling through the cracks, and you kind of get getting them to talk about the other senses. So I had some really good mentorship on this project, and one of the mentors, Angela Hurd, was telling me that a really good way of interviewing people is just kind of try and tap into other senses so they can use their imagination a bit, and really kind of build that picture of what it was like being there. So other than just the sounds, but what kind of smells were there? How did it feel in the summer when it was really busy? All these other things, it kind of builds that picture in a different way, which is really nice.
It's interesting that you talk about the senses as well, because when you take something like a pier, already like a load of senses sort of come to my mind, or the sort of sensory memory. Because for me, strangely enough, I'm not a fan of the beach itself, but I do really love piers. And I really love the smell as well, that sort of salty smell that you get on piers. So for me, it's kind of like a mix of like the sensation of sand, which is something I'm not actually very comfortable with, but then mixed with this sort of nice smell and the nice sounds that you hear on the pier.
Yeah, there is something. I mean, I don't know much about piers in other parts of the world, but I know at least in England. Specifically, that we have quite a Victorian association with them as kind of being like holiday destinations, like very traditional holiday destinations. I grew up in Grays, and whenever we we would want to get out the area, we'd go down to Southend and go down and that felt like a real adventure, because it's like the longest pier in the world. It's a mile long. You've got to get a train to the end. That was just like, oh my God, this is insane. And we were going out over the Thames. It wasn't even the sea at that point, really, which the estuary, I know. But so there is something, and at the end of that piece, Hidden Sounds of Coastal Arcades, all throughout there's interviews with a woman called Lorne Spicer, who some people might recognize from Cash. I think she did like Cash in the Attic, but she was great to interview because she knew how to speak in sound bites, like repeating the question and keeping it really succinct, which is really useful from an editing perspective. But she talked about how plays themselves are like overtly playful. Piers themselves are overtly playful. You go there to play. It's kind of nuts to sort of walk out over the water, and you can see the gaps in the wooden planks as you look down. They feel kind of dangerous, but they're like a bit of an adventure in themselves.
So what would you say sort of first got you into music, or more specifically sound, as this kind of very rich sort of medium to explore?
I think the memory I've got of when I knew I wanted to do this sort of all the time, was I was doing A-level music, and my teacher took us to go and see Music for 18 Musicians by Steve Reich. And if anyone knows that piece of music, it's very meditative, very repetitive, really rich harmonies and kind of gorgeous textures. But some people might think it's dull because it just does a lot of the same thing over and over. But it really got me into minimalism and that idea of the kind of the feeling of sound as much as anything. Like how is that sound making you feel, not through just the lyrics or what have you. And it's weird. For a long time, I kind of had like two different ways of working, where I'd have like songs. I was in a band and I'd play songs, and then I'd have like experiments that I do on the laptop. I studied music tech at uni and kind of did all sorts of weird and wonderful projects there. But it's only in the last, say, 5 years or so that I've really worked quite hard at crossing those two areas over, and let one inform the other. But yeah, I started playing the keyboard in primary school, and then picked up the guitar, and just sort of gone from there. Really, it's always been something that I've just found really interesting, and enjoyed doing. And it's just kind of I think I follow my interests really, quite fundamentally, and I'm super lucky to be able to do that for sure.
And it's difficult listening to your music is. I love the kind of otherworldly sounds that you often produce, because I think they linger in the mind in a lot of ways. Sort of
Okay.
thereafter, sort of when you hear something and it's kind of strange to the ears, and then it sort of lingers for a while, and you kind of get this. You kind of need to hear it again, which I find quite interesting. But I do find it difficult to sort of put a genre, like put your music down to a genre. How would you sort of best describe the stuff that you make?
It depends. I mean, so it's interesting that question is really interesting in its own right, because we think of that question as, what kind of music do you make, as something you ask an artist, a musical artist, that is. But it's not something you really think of with, say, composers. So because especially a composer for media, like a film composer, a television composer, they are someone who will create the right sound for the right picture. And so I like that I don't want to restrict myself too much. I'm aware that a lot of what I do is very kind of electronic. I use the word electronica, so sort of really inspired by people like Forte and John Hopkins. So people who use sort of sound design for kind of electronic dance music. But then, I'm big on ambient and down tempo, and kind of more experimental compositions as well. So sort of somewhere between all those three, really. Like, I guess electronica and like experimental really is probably the best description, but it depends what mood I'm in.
What is it when you come up with one of these? When you come up with your music, I mean, what is the sort of goal in mind? Do you see them more as sort of soundtracks, or just their own kind of? Because listening to yours, it sounds more like music experimentation, which could probably be a genre in its own right.
My like compositional process has changed quite a lot in the last few years. When I was in a band, my composition process was I would sit down with a guitar or like at the laptop, and I'd have like a blank screen, and it would, I'd try and write a thing. I can't do that anymore. It just doesn't work for me. And what I've realized now is that I've much rather enjoy being inspired by a sound. So play is really center to my practice. So that might be going out with a microphone and recording For example, like going to an arcade with with an electromagnetic field microphone and finding some sounds and then using those to make a song. Or it might be circuit bending something, or kind of getting loads of toys out and connecting them up and improvising and recording all of that, and then taking those sounds and finding something inspiring in them, and then kind of bouncing off of that. So that's my process now. Is more about being inspired, and when it comes to actually as for your question, like what's the goal in mind when I'm composing? Sometimes, well, at the moment I'm working on seasonal EPs, so I'm doing a release for every season. Done 3 so far. The last one, spring, I'm working on. So that's what I have in mind at the moment, really, when I'm writing music, is that. But sometimes I don't really have anything in mind, and it's just kind of whatever I want to do. And so, it depends. Again, it depends what kind of mood you're in. But sometimes that can be liberating. You can go anywhere, but also having no brief can be really debilitating, because you're like, oh God, when you can do everything, when you can do anything, how on earth do you choose what to do? So yeah, sometimes having a tighter brief is really useful for sure.
I know for a lot of people, it's probably the last thing they want to talk about, but the lockdown, I'm interested, the people I've been speaking to, about not just how they continue with their work and their creative process in this situation, but also how it may have either hindered or possibly even benefited in some people's cases. Personally, I found it a bit tricky to stay as productive. I know with regards to you, it's different. On one hand, you're doing the stuff with Signals, which is obviously part of your work, so that's maybe a relatively more simple to carry on with. But in terms of your own stuff, or just doing your own work, do you feel it's had an effect at all?
Yeah, definitely. So when I was supposed to go on holiday, when lockdown was announced, I was supposed to be on a plane to Canada, and so I had 2 weeks booked off, and obviously I didn't go on a plane to Canada. And so, but I had 2 weeks of holiday, so I took it anyway. So I went into that first 2 weeks really focused, and I was like, right, I'm going to do, I'm on holiday. I'm going to do something good. I'm going to have fun. So I soldered up loads of different kits that I had of like little instruments. I finished another EP. And I just kind of I started ticking things off a list. I was like, I want to use this time efficiently because it's holiday, and if I waste it, that's terrible. And then I kind of got to the end of that holiday, and I'd done all these things, and I was like, I hit a real low, because I was like, well, what do I do now? And I'd finished the EP, I'd released it, and I'd soldered all the kits that I had locking around, and I was like, oh, how do I just be? And that was I was persevering, going so fast that I wasn't really I guess that moment was really interesting, and I kind of had to take note of why I felt that way, but then also work out, well, what do I want to be working on at the moment? And why do I want to work on those things? And I need deadlines. That's just how my brain works. I find I don't get anything done unless I have deadlines. So then I had to kind of come up with some new ones to sort of move forward, but then also think, well, maybe that's not, it's not the best to just. For a long time, my productivity was really tied to my self-worth, and that can be useful, because it means you get a lot of things done, but it can also be really dangerous, because if you have a off day, which everyone does, then you can feel terrible about yourself, and so that managing that is something I'm getting better at for sure.
Yeah, same. I'm definitely the same when it comes to deadlines, and I think that's why I found it a bit more difficult to, because again, start of lockdown, people thinking, okay, I'm going to have all this time to do stuff. I basically have all the time in the world to get onto projects that I haven't had time to do. And then, I've kind of hit a snag where I think part of it is, I was talking about this on my last podcast, where a lot of the sort of stimulus for my work comes from interactions that I have often, maybe at work or just out in, just out doing stuff. But I think I love bouncing ideas off people. And there's something about when you're sitting in front of someone, when someone's physically in the room with you and getting ideas out like that, and you can sort of, it's definitely kind of impeded that. Getting a bit better at doing it now, but it's kind of difficult without, like you said, without a deadline, because we don't really know when this is going to stop. So again, it's kind of it's like continuing without a deadline at the moment.
Your point about collaboration is really interesting. So something we've been trying to do. So Clip, the music club I run, is still going, but we're just meeting online. And the kind of key to that has always been collaboration, and specifically like improvising, collaborating. And so that's really hard to do on a video call because, latency, and some of our members live in the middle of nowhere, so their internet connection's poor. So we've been like trying to find ways where we can kind of get we can kind of take advantage of the situation, but still collaborate. So one thing we did on Monday night, which worked really well, was, the drawing game, Exquisite Corpse? Someone draws a head, someone draws a body, someone draws some legs. Well, we did that, but with music. So someone did a rhythm, someone did a melody, and someone did something textural. And we kind of decided on a tempo and a few other things. And it was brilliant, and the result was amazing.
It does sound great, yeah.
But it was a really nice way of collaborating independently, and everyone could work on their own thing. And we kind of had a few things that we decided, and then I mixed the song live, and we listened to it for the first time on the video chat, and it was one of the best sessions we've done online. It kind of took advantage of the situation really well. So yeah, it's not ideal by any stretch of the imagination, but if you do have the capacity, then I think there are I don't want to use the word opportunities, but there are kind of ways that you can still collaborate that kind of get close to that in person kind of creative scenarios, I think are really nice.
But it's interesting, you sort of touched upon there the kind of measures people are taking to try and deal with it. So for instance, I've been seeing a lot of quarantine covers so you got the quarantine covers from loads of different artists, but you also have like I think they're called the sofa sessions. Mm-hmm. So there are even some of those in Colchester as well, where people are basically, doing live gigs from their front room, which are really interesting to see. But again, it's almost this, it's very strange, this idea that you have someone there and they are effectively playing to an audience, but it's a silent audience and it's all online. And I think it'd be interesting to see how different industries are going to kind of adapt because of this, especially the music industry.
Yeah. I'm doing my first live stream tomorrow night, Thursday night, which will be a really, I'm quite nervous. First, I don't really play live so much. I'm much more of a studio musician, but it's something I've been wanting to do. So I'm kind of taking that risk and giving it a go, which is cool. But one thing I will say, though, is that I think there seems to be a lot of pressure, or I think maybe self-imposed, but a lot of people feel the need to be seen to be doing stuff at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely.
To be seen to be thriving. I have to, and that's because some people need to make money because they've lost their income. I totally get that. But there's also nothing wrong with really just surviving. And like looking after yourself. And if your creative process has hit a wall, that's totally understandable. I mean, my God, we're in like a worldwide pandemic. It makes total sense if you can't make any work at the moment. That's fine. And maybe that isn't spoken about enough as well. I think there is a risk at the moment that when lockdown does end, quite a few people will come out of it absolutely exhausted and not necessarily ready to go back into life as normal, whatever that might look like. So there is nothing. Yeah, there's nothing wrong with using this time. If you if you're at a lucky position where you can use this time for planning, then absolutely, you don't. Not everyone needs to be kind of pushing themselves out there into the world online right now. If it doesn't suit your style or your practice or whatever.
Especially as so many people are doing that at the moment as well. So if anything, online has become even more saturated because I get, I think you absolutely nailed it there about people feeling the need to show that they're being productive. Whereas I think actually the expectation from most people is that you're just keeping on, really. It doesn't need to be a new piece of work every week. It just needs to be a pop your head up and say hi. And
and I guess it's that excuse me, it's that it as with most art, like, what's the why are you doing this stuff? And for some people it is like, I need to earn income. Okay, cool. That makes sense. That's a pretty good why. But if it's for the sake of it, then what's the quality of that work, really? I mean, there's a really good kind of art critics on Instagram, the White Pube, and they put up like an artist bingo, like quarantine artist bingo, and it was like photography of an empty street. Just a few of these little kind of tropes that we've all seen, and I'm like, oh god, yeah. But is that in itself elitist? And if people are enjoying themselves, really, that's what matters. Yeah, okay. So there's kind of different ways of looking at it.
I guess it's difficult with the kind of lack of stimulus, and again, it just feels like you're approaching the same. First of all, people are kind of approaching the same topics, and like you said, shots of empty streets, quarantine covers, things like that. And then after that, you really kind of run out of things to do it about. And I guess after that, it becomes more about more abstract sort of concepts about, I don't know, the deeper levels of society and things like that. Interestingly enough, the only thing other than the podcast I do primarily, I think, as a means of, because this does feel a lot more natural. It takes a lot less. I don't want to say less effort. I want to say it because we're having so many conversations at the moment anyway. So they feel like a very natural thing to do, and I think it is a very healthy thing to do as well, to continue talking to each other. And also, even though people are probably sick of it, it is important to keep talking this stuff through, because I think it keeps us mentally there. But weirdly enough, in terms of actual like other work, the only thing I seem to be able to do at the moment are little horror stories.
Okay.
Which is something I've always loved doing, but it's weird that that's what I saw. I think people are looking for things more hopeful at the moment, but then maybe part of me is kind of trying to sort of taking advantage of that at the moment, where at a time when people feel quite insecure, to sort of read a bit of horror.
Yeah. But whatever's working right now, you kind of got to run with that. You can't fight yourself too much. It's like when you try and, if you hit a creative wall, do you try and work through that, or do you just listen to your body and go like, no, it's just not happening today. I'm gonna move on. So like if that's what you're making at the moment, that's what you're making at the moment. Run with it. See where it goes.
Yeah, exactly. It kind of reminds me of. Have you ever seen the film Barton Fink by the Coen brothers?
No.
See, I can't remember what script they were working on at the time, but they were trying to work on a script for another film they did bring out later, which was very successful. But at one point they hit a creative wall. So they wrote a different script called Barton Fink, which is actually about which is about like writer's block.
Amazing.
So again, I think sometimes it's just of the situation that you're in. So I think for me, like personally, whereas I've been dealing quite well with some sort of insecurities and the fears that are naturally going to be there, and I think I've chosen to kind of channel that in sort of these little horror stories as a means of taking some control over that. But I think it is interesting with people feel the need to have output, but some of the output has been quite interesting. some of the stuff we've seen. And like I said, I've absolutely loved some of the quarantine covers that we've had.
There's a really lovely a few. I mean, there's loads of Facebook groups that have been set up as like support networks, but one I'm particularly enjoying is I think it's called the Listening Room or the Listening Group or something, and it's just people posting videos of them going out on walks. There's been a lot of talk of nature becoming louder as our activity has lessened. Well, not loud is probably the wrong word, but more visible in their in their activity. And so lots of people are just posting videos of like bird song or like interesting. So my knowledge of bird calls has actually really improved, which has been quite, not to link it to something productive, of course. But I've really enjoyed that of the kind of people sharing the natural spaces. I think it's been really nice as well.
What's that called? The Listening Room?
Yeah, I'll just double check
now.
But
it's interesting you say
the Wild Listening Project.
The Wild Listening Project. I'll have to check that out.
Would recommend.
Because I've been going on like daily bike rides. One of the things I love doing is forests, nearby woodlands. And again, there's the sounds that you hear. So I haven't recorded any sounds, but I have taken some pictures. Went out.
I went out on Sunday morning, and my girlfriend and I went to Highwoods for. I think we got there at like 4:30 a.m. and we got there for the dawn chorus, and it was amazing.
Wow!
It was just so loud. That was the main. Like I was really overwhelmed by how loud it was, and of course I took a bunch of microphones and recorded some stuff. But just to kind of sit there in silence we went to a few different locations, the kind of woodland up near the school of Guildford, the down by the lake in the middle, and then some kind of other bushes sort of another side. Just we were kind of following different bird calls that we heard. But it was so good to just be like totally kind of encased in these like sounds it was also nice to just have a change of environment as well. But it was really magical. Yeah, really, really good.
Plus, it's something of a concert, really, isn't it? Like sitting there as an audience for this.
And we got back, and I was sort of offloading all my recordings, and then I've got a few friends who are quite good with their bird calls. I was like, "What was this? What was this? What was this?" So now, just trying to, because it's really quite. We was one bit where we were sat and we could hear these two birds kind of having a conversation. It turns out they were woodpeckers, and that was really you just sort of sat there listening to these conversations happening all around you. It was really, really, really good. But that being in woodland, I just really did make it feel really magical. There is something really nice about going into the woods. Feels like a bit of an adventure.
Yeah, and so at the moment, one of the main bike route that I take goes into Wivenhoe on the trail, and again, for the majority of the time, it's these lovely kind of nature sounds. You've got bird calls and pond life as well. You can sort of hear chirping and things like that. But then every hour or so, I think a train comes through, and it's this, and it absolutely blares its horn.
Yeah.
But it's this interesting kind of how trains and cars have become sort of less common sounds at the moment, because I know the roads do seem to have picked up a bit in terms of traffic, but for a while at least, because I've just been cycling on what were busy roads that you would never dare cycle on. I've just been cycling on them now because they're basically empty near where I live. So it's interesting that actually for once, and again it comes back to that thing, is they're always there. We just don't really listen to them as much, or we don't hear them over the sounds of city life. So I found it really interesting now that for me, like a car noise or a train noise, actually sort of pricks up my ears a bit because it's a less common sound now. For me at the moment, the more sort of common sounds are just birds call, and I'm one of the people lucky enough to have a garden, so I like to sit out in there as well, and you can just hear the birds sort of talking to each other. And
you're right about so there's a guy called R. Murray Schafer, and he wrote a lot about like soundscapes. He came up with the word soundscape, but like acoustic ecology, and the kind of like the orchestration of sound, specifically like out of natural environments. And so where you've got your like your low frequency sounds, your mid, your high, and where do all these sounds fit inside that? If you think about going, walking into a forest and thinking of that as an orchestra, and a traffic might have been a constant all the way through that, and we're quite good at kind of rejecting unwanted sounds. If you're at a party and there's music blaring, you can still hear the person next to you because you're focusing on them, and so your brain goes, I'm going to ignore that sound over there now. But now these traffic noises aren't constant in the same way. They kind of come in and come out, and we're like, oh yeah, that's weird. I haven't heard that in a while.
I almost think that this is what previous generations must have felt like when these things started coming, started being introduced. So, the first motor cars, the first trains, the first, traffic lights and all these things. It's an interesting kind of look into the past in a way, because it's like, this must have been that kind of jarring feeling I get now when I hear a train or a car speed by. But,
I wonder what that might look like in the next 50 years or so.
Yeah, and what sounds might become sort of a bit more alien to us over time.
I guess as transport moves electric, engine noises themselves will probably disappear. But at the moment, they're making electric cars have a sound, like they're adding sounds to them for safety reasons, really.
Like when they add the smell of gas to ovens and things like that, I think.
Yeah. So I know I do wonder. There's a thing called World Listening Day every year, and I think in 2018, I was doing a project for it, and the question was, what does your future sound like? And I thought that's a really interesting question, because that kind of ties into like, well, where do you think you'll be? What do you think you'll be surrounded by? All those sorts of things. It's really, really, it kind of sparks some interesting conversations.
One of the other interesting things I found, so sitting in my garden, is all the houses behind me, because of course now no one's leaving their house, so I get all day really a chorus of sounds. So for the sort of early part of the day, it's mainly children playing, because they would, and then in the evening it kind of matures, the sound, to sort of people playing music, students and the like, because I live near the university, so I get a lot of students around here as well. And then you hear the sort of adults more clearly, that kind of thing. So that's interesting as well, because obviously I can't see any of these people. I have no idea what they look like, but I just essentially just listening to their lives from my garden, which is at once surreal, but also really fascinating to just sort of.
Do you feel like you've got to know your neighbours more?
I think I've created an image of them, whereas I don't know how well I know. I sort of know certain things that are going on just by patterns that I'm hearing, certain tones in people's voices, like, oh, he must not like him, or something like that, or they're having a hard time right now. So I guess in a way I do, but without learning any of their names or any of their faces. So so part of me just feeling like, is this just an image I've created of them, of their lives? Maybe their lives are completely different.
Yeah. No, one not long after lockdown, there was a WhatsApp group set up for the street I live on. So there's now all sorts of conversations flying around on that, which is quite interesting. But I've got quite a young family next door to me, and I know them so much better now than I did before. Just because we're around, we see each other more often. Like, we're both in the garden at similar times, and so it's we're talking more often. And I do feel like there's been quite a community feeling in my immediate area. Which is nice. Which is really, really lovely. There's been a lot. In the group, it's like, oh, I need this. Has everyone got one? and those kind of things. The stuff that you'd do anyway if you knew
Yeah.
your neighbours, but now it's our like kind of neighbour circle has expanded a little bit, which has been really, really lovely.
I got that in a way. It's a different kind of neighborhood.
Yeah, it
It's
totally depends
people.
where you live, right?
Yeah, because I think the thing around my neighborhood is people. It's not. I think, barring a few exceptions, it's not the sort of place people have been all their lives. So it's more. It's a lot of sort of temporary. Like I said, there's a lot of students and
Yeah,
things like
really
that. So
transient.
it's
Yeah.
kind of sort of temporary and ever sort of shifting. But across from me, I have, in a way, again, I don't really speak to them, but I do wave on the way to work, because the shop that I'm working at is literally just around the corner, and I feel it's kind of 50-50. So around that way, I have noticed, people smiling at each other more, people, saying hello and waving and that kind of thing. They'll probably see me in the shop later, so that's probably why they're being so, But another thing that's kind of interesting that I forget about until it's happening. So it'll be this moment, because I'll have the windows open and I'm, trying to, I don't know, I'm writing or reading. It'll be very quiet, and you just sort of hear the birds and you hear sort of light traffic in the background. But then at 8 o'clock on a Thursday, suddenly, and again, like I said, I forget that it's happening until it's happening.
Yeah.
It was so alarm, and then you realize what's happening. Like, oh, okay, so everyone starts clapping on my street, and it took them a few weeks to start doing it. But yeah, they started clapping and then banging pots.
Yep.
And I think now it's escalated to fireworks.
Yeah.
So it'll be interesting to see where that goes next. I'm imagining you every Thursday at 8 with a sort of microphone just stood in your garden, sort of listening.
Well, I mean, yeah, I must admit, I did attempt to record the first one, but my recorder, it's one of those. It's got that annoying feature where you press it once to arm it, and then you press it a second time to actually record. And so I got to the end of the first clap, and it was like, "Yeah, you're gonna press record." And I was like, "Oh shit!"
I did that of an entire podcast recently.
Oh no. It's horrible. It's such a horrible feeling. So, don't worry. It happens to the best of us. But no, I've done some recording. There's someone who started playing the trumpet opposite me, who gets their trumpet out and plays every Thursday, which is quite nice.
See, I don't think we have anyone like that on my street. So it's just sort of, I hear like Mr. Brightside blaring or something like that. And that's kind of the best I can hope for. Other than that, it's just garage, and it's just, I have no idea what's going on.
Yeah, I kind of think I might take like some of my circuit bent instruments out there next time and see what they think, because it'll be just as noisy as as all of their stuff. I was like, yeah, this is what I do for a living. Oh, okay.
There's closed off curtains. A man's out there again. Oh, okay. So I'm interested to know what's next for you. So I know it might be a bit, probably a bit hard to say at the moment, but where do you sort of see this going in the future? I mean, you mentioned you obviously run the Clip Club, and you work at Signals as well. So it's got kind of an idea of where it's going. But where do you sort of see it going in the future?
Yeah, I kind of got into doing a lot of education work when I moved to Colchester in 2015, through kind of volunteering at First Sight and getting involved in the youth program there. And I just really enjoyed it because I got to feel like an artist. And I do really love, I kind of worked in retail all my life, so I kind of can hold conversations with people I don't know, kind of members of the public. And I just really enjoyed education work, and it paid, which is which is always really nice. And so over the last couple of years, me and Simon Keep set up Clip, and we run a sort of weekly music club doing that, which is wonderful. I really enjoy it, and I really want to put more time into it in the future and grow that. We're looking at having a second club set up somewhere, and kind of doing bigger projects with bigger partners. So stuff that kind of allows me to feel like an artist, but is educational. So I feel like I'm giving back, and I'm, providing a service that people benefit from. So it's, what makes the world a better place. And then I also feel like I am kind of getting a creative hit from as well. And if I can if that's a Venn diagram and I can kind of sit in the middle of that, then that's brilliant. I get my creative kick and I'm kind of, making the world a better place. By encouraging people to be more creative and to feel better about themselves by making music, then that's kind of, the more I can do of that, the better, really. And so that materializes in different ways, through education work. But then also I don't want to neglect my own artistic side, my outright artistic side. So last year, that's why I started doing the seasonal EPs, because I hadn't made any music for myself in a long time. I'd done freelance commissions and that, but not any songs per se. So I'll probably find more ways of kind of setting deadlines for myself. So something I've been playing around with a lot lately has been solar panel microphones and kind of listening to the sound of light, which is a really strange sentence.
The sounds of light.
Yeah. It's set up over there. But you can connect a solar panel to an amplifier, and then if you get a bicycle light, like a flashing light, and shine it at the panel, the photovoltaic effect, as current is generated by the photons hitting the panel, that's the same way a microphone works, because it's a magnetic core. It's a circle of copper moving over a magnetic core, which then creates current. So they work in the same way. So you're not really hearing light per se. You're kind of hearing the rhythm or the frequency of that light. But it's really fun, and I've been on eBay buying different LED lights and bicycle lights and all sorts of stuff. I've got just behind me, so there's this weird flashing thing, and this one is these are both underwater hot tub lights that are really cool. But different lights make different sounds, like melodies and stuff like that. So and they're all really weird tempos and really weird time signatures, because they're not programmed with sound in mind. They're programmed to look cool, or because we've got this many LEDs. So they're it's a really rich kind of sonics soundscape. So I think what I'll do after I've done the spring EP will probably be focus on making a kind of a solar panel light EP. And then something me and Simon are working on actually is turning this idea into an instrument as well. So because at the moment I'm it's all crocodile clips and breadboard, and it's not safe. Well, no, it is safe because it's all low powered, but it's fragile and delicate, and it's like I say, crocodile clips and tape. And so we're gonna look at turning that into an instrument that's a thing that we can sell, which would be amazing.
I find this kind of the incorporation of science into your work quite intriguing as well. I like how there's always this there's loads more information behind each clip and each sound, the words. But I find that really kind of interesting concept as well. There's kind of the music of light, and also how you mentioned there's this sort of strange dichotomy between, how sound works opposed to sort of light, and how the light sort of works in ways that we wouldn't expect it to music. I'm probably butchering that as I say it, because it's kind of such an interesting concept that I can't really put it into words, but it sounds really cool.
That translation, isn't it, of how do you take this and then turn it into sound? So when NASA NASA have got a great sound cloud, and they stick stuff up on there, and it's all this is a black hole, the sound of a black hole, or this is a what's that star that kind of emits stuff from either side and pulses? Is it a pulsar? I think it's a pulsar. And they kind of got the sound of that, but it's not the sound per se. It's when we see pictures from Hubble, it's that's not visible light we're looking at. It's infrared, but they've made it whatever. So that kind of, it's all that translation. And I'm really interested in hidden sounds and stuff that is there, but we're just not tuned to hear it. And there's all this stuff that's just I
think that's what's kind of tantalizing about it. It's this forbidden knowledge almost. Yeah, it's what's the sort of unknown behind each thing. So,
it's curious, isn't it? It's like
yeah.
it's kind of magical and like, oh, I wonder, it's and I love that because you feel, you totally feel like an adventurer or explorer, and you're kind of like uncovering something, that. And when I was doing that Walton piece, and I was sort of walking around the arcade with this gadget, like recording the things, and I'm just like beaming ear to ear because I found this amazing light, and everyone's like, what is this guy doing? Why is he listening to the Minion 2P machine so excitedly? But I'm there like, but the rhythm is sick. It's really good. So yeah, I think like I'm just going to keep following my interest. I've read, through that Walton piece, I've really discovered that play is really central to like everything that I do as an artist, and that's really nice to have that realization. So all the projects going forward will be play centered in some way. I'd love to do another radio piece, like exploring other sounds of play and like other places where we play and what they sound like. So thinking about things like the fairground, stuff like that, and keep making more music, really, for sure.
Sounds good. And what are you doing tomorrow? The live stream tomorrow?
Yeah, so my friend Lula York and her partner Dave, they've got a YouTube channel, TR33N, and they're kind of inviting different people on each week to do live streams. I'm going to be live streaming some solar panel stuff. It's been a nightmare to set up, but I'm getting there. And once I've done it once, it'll be okay because then I can do it again. But kind of just trying to learn OBS and had to rewire my studio so they've got the right cables. And when you're having to like get a cable and it's got 3 connectors on the end, so it's the right thing to plug in. It's a nightmare, but I love that.
But yeah, it sounds good, man. It's good to hear that people are still carrying on, and that we at least get some great content out of all this.
Hopefully. No promises.
I mean, this will probably go out later in the week, so I'll stick a link. I'll stick a link in for that. If you want me to, if it goes well.
If it's blank beneath, then read between the lines.